Welcome, dear listeners of Golden Memories. Thank you for every like, comment, and warm word. They inspire us to create new heartfelt stories. Subscribe so you don't miss the next episodes, and enjoy listening.
When I returned from visiting my brother Marcus, I discovered my sanctuary had vanished, and my daughter-in-law Victoria was grinning triumphantly in what used to be the guest quarters. She remained oblivious to the $280,000. The moment I pushed open the front door of what had been my refuge for decades, the first sensation wasn't the familiar aroma of jasmine or fresh gardenias I'd anticipated. Instead, a nauseating cloud of smoldering Palo Santo assaulted my senses, not the gentle variety used for peaceful meditation, but the aggressive kind wielded when attempting to obliterate traces of someone's existence. Then Victoria's voice pierced the air, crystal clear, echoing from the corridor. "This sanctuary belongs to me now," she declared, crystal goblet raised, addressing her collection of yoga companions draped in pastel wraps and artificially enhanced features. That ancient woman exists only in my husband's fading recollections, and even those are dissolving. Their collective laughter rang out, dismissing 4 decades of my existence like some stubborn stain on mahogany. I remained silent, simply stepped across the threshold and secured the door. 4 weeks. That's the duration of my absence. My brother Marcus had suffered a stroke, prompting my train journey to Denver to assist during his recovery. I organized his medications, I prepared his meals, I helped him bathe. Daily, thoughts of home consumed me. I yearned for my rose garden. I missed my weathered porch swing. I longed for the cedar scent emanating from my bedroom armoire. Never did I imagine missing my own bedroom because another soul would be occupying it. I glided through the living area unnoticed. Nobody acknowledged my presence. They were engrossed in discussions about mimosas and gratitude journals. Upon reaching the hallway, I froze. My heart hammered against my ribs. Where my wedding portrait once hung, a photograph I'd personally framed showing my husband's arm encircling my shoulders, his expression radiating disbelief that I'd accepted his proposal, it had disappeared. Replacing it was an enormous canvas print of Victoria and my son beaming on some tropical shore, clasping hands as if they'd invented romance. The door to my bedroom, what had been my bedroom, stood wide open. Inside, furniture had been rearranged. My grandmother's quilt was gone. In its place were ivory and gold cushions, some synthetic fur throw, and a gaudy new sign suspended above the bed. His and hers, meditation sanctuary. Victoria stood centered in the room, offering a mimosa to a companion. "We cleansed the space to eliminate her essence," she announced, gesturing toward the corner where my nightstand once resided. Her friends giggled. "She's like a specter," one whispered, "wandering about in house slipper." "Perhaps she left something in her testament," another added, "like her dentures." "I visualize her disappearing," declared a third, sipping her beverage while curling up on the bed where I once knelt in prayer each evening. I spoke not a word. I retreated and made my way to the living room. My suitcase, the identical one I'd packed for Marcus's care, remained positioned by the entrance. Nobody offered assistance. Nobody noticed. Later that evening, Victoria informed me she'd transformed my bedroom for positive energy realignment, and it had become a healing sanctuary for her and my son. "You can rest on the sofa, Margaret," she said, motioning toward the rigid floral couch I hadn't used in years. "It's actually beneficial for blood flow at your age." She smiled as if bestowing a blessing. I turned to my son, but he was absorbed in texting. He mumbled, "It's just temporary, Mom." Without lifting his gaze, I stood there momentarily, gripping my suitcase handle with both hands. I didn't request the room's return. I didn't argue, I simply nodded. That night, I lay on the couch, curled beneath an old Afghan that barely covered my feet. My lower back throbbed, and the lamp buzzed with a persistent electric hum. I heard their laughter echoing from down the hall. My room, her room now, glowed under candlelight. The following morning, Victoria handed me a bottle of green juice and said, "Brunch begins at 11. Try to remain invisible, okay?" My friends embrace minimalism. Minimalism? That's what I'd become, an object to minimize. I walked to the backyard and sat on the bench beside my dying hydrangeas. The hose lay coiled, bone dry. Nobody had watered them during my absence. I whispered, "I'm still here." But even the flowers seemed uncertain. That evening, passing the dining room, I noticed a note taped to the refrigerator. "No refrigerator access after 7 p.m., intermittent fasting hours." And underneath, in permanent marker, someone had scrawled, "Residents only." That was the night I realized they wanted me to vanish. Not just from the house, but from memory, from history, from the walls, the rooms, the life I'd constructed brick by brick. But what they didn't understand was that ghosts don't fade, not if they remember who they are. And I remembered every nail my husband hammered into this house's frame. I remembered the day we planted the dogwood tree in the front yard. I remembered the night my son was born in that very room Victoria had cleansed. And I remembered something else, something I hadn't told them yet. I've always believed that cruelty doesn't arrive with screaming. It creeps in softly wearing a smile. It begins with small things. A door left ajar. A picture quietly removed, a glance too prolonged to be innocent, too brief to be called caring. The morning after the brunch, I attempted to connect to the Wi-Fi to check an email from my brother. The password had changed. I asked Victoria about it. She didn't even look up from her yoga mat. "Oh," she said casually, "we reset it while you were gone. It's for residents only now." She emphasized the word residence as if I were some stranger on a month-to-month lease. I nodded, said nothing, and walked away. Later that afternoon, I opened the refrigerator for some milk. A neon pink sticky note was slapped across the carton. Not for seniors, plant-based only. I stared at it for a long time. I don't know what stung more, being called a senior, like some expired item in the back of the fridge, or realizing someone had sat down and written that note by hand, peeled it carefully, and stuck it there for me to find. At lunch, Victoria sent a group message on the family thread. "Please stay out of the kitchen during brunch prep. It's a high energy zone." Then another just below it. "Also, please do not rearrange anything on the counter. Flow matters." I never touched her counter. I never rearranged a thing. I hadn't even boiled water since I returned. But apparently, my presence alone could disrupt her energy. That night, I passed by the entryway table and saw a card propped up in a little silver stand. It read, "New home blessing. May this house be free of ghosts." I suppose I was the ghost. I stood in the hall in front of the bedroom door that used to be mine. The smell of burned Palo Santo still clung to the frame. The walls had been repainted, a dull beige, to match the aesthetic of her online lifestyle brand. They even changed the curtains. The ones I hand-stitched with roses and vines were gone, probably tossed just like everything else I loved. I didn't cry. I just watched the light flicker in the hallway and listened to the clink of wine glasses behind that door. Some nights, I'd sit on the couch, a blanket pulled up to my chest, and scroll through old voicemails on my phone. My husband's voice was still there, that low, steady hum of a man who had never once made me feel like I was in the way. It's strange how a house can be full of voices, and none of them speak to you, but not all voices were cruel. It happened on a Tuesday evening. Everyone else was out for Victoria's full moon sound bath. Just me and little Sophie, my 8-year-old granddaughter, were home. She shuffled into the living room, dragging her stuffed elephant by one ear. She stood in front of me for a long time, quiet, like she was working up the courage to say something dangerous. Then she reached into the front pocket of her hoodie and pulled out a small wrinkled piece of fabric. "I saved this," she whispered. "They threw away your pillow, but I cut out the soft part before it got taken." She unfolded it carefully. A faded corner of my old pillowcase, the one with the stitched edge that frayed after years of being held close. "I thought you might still want it," she added. eyes darting toward the hallway like she feared being heard. My throat closed up. I reached out with both hands, took the piece gently, and pressed it to my chest. For a moment, I could feel the old cotton against my skin, could remember the nights I wept into it after my husband passed, the nights I folded it neatly before bed, the mornings it smelled of lavender sachets from the drawer. I looked at Sophie. She was biting her lip. "Do you miss your room?" she asked quietly. I nodded. "I liked when it smelled like cinnamon," she said, "and you used to let me sit on your lap and read." "You still can," I whispered. She leaned in and curled up beside me, her head against my shoulder. It was the first time in weeks I felt like I hadn't disappeared. The next day, the cruelty resumed. Victoria dropped a basket of laundry on the couch while I was still sitting on it and said, "If you're going to be here all day, might as well fold something." She smiled. She always smiled when she delivered her little daggers. But something had shifted in me. Maybe it was Sophie's tiny act of love. Maybe it was the feeling of that pillow fabric in my hand. Maybe it was the sound of my own heart saying, "You still matter." That night when I walked past the room again, I didn't look away. I opened the door slowly, stepped inside, and stood still. The air was thick with lavender candles and overpriced incense. I reached for the nightstand, not mine anymore, but in the drawer was something they hadn't found. An old lamp, a gift from my husband years ago, still plugged in, still humming faintly when I turned the knob. They thought it was just a lamp, but I remembered something about it they didn't, and suddenly I wasn't afraid anymore. They wished to erase me, but they forgot who built the story they're trying to rewrite. And that story wasn't over yet. My husband never believed in shouting. He used to say, if they can't hear you whisper, they were never listening anyway. But the last thing he ever said to me, the one sentence I never forgot, came on a quiet afternoon just weeks before he passed. I was brushing his hair near the window, the sun making halos through the curtain lace, and he reached for my wrist, held it with surprising strength. "If they ever try to erase you," he said, "don't fight loud, fight smart." At the time, I thought he was being poetic, but I see now that he wasn't speaking in metaphors. He was preparing me, and so I didn't yell when they changed the locks on the upstairs linen closet. I didn't protest when Victoria moved my favorite armchair into the garage to open up the flow. I didn't even flinch when my own wedding photo was replaced with a minimalist art print that said, "New Era Energy." I waited, and I remembered. There was one item I'd insisted on keeping from our old bedroom when they remodeled. A lamp. Just an old brass lamp with a little wobbly shade and a base that had once been scratched by our cat. Everyone else thought it was ugly, too old, too heavy, too grandma core. Victoria tried to swap it out twice with something from her influencer gift sets, but I always brought it back. She stopped trying eventually. People always do when they think you've stopped mattering. That lamp had been a wedding gift, a special commission, actually. My husband had it made by a retired electrical engineer who owed him a favor. I never knew why he went through so much trouble for a bedside lamp. He just smiled and said, "Some things shine brighter when the world gets dark." It wasn't until he was gone, until the house grew sharp with other people's voices, that I remembered the tiny latch beneath the base. That night, I unplugged the lamp and turned it upside down on my lap. My fingers found the metal ridge beneath the felt. I peeled it back slowly, and there it was. A thin silver disc, no larger than a button, hidden flush inside the base, a small inscription around the edge. "If you hear this, it means you need to." Ertl, I took a deep breath and pressed it. The lamp didn't light up, but the room changed anyway. His voice came through clear as day. Calm, steady, measured. "This is Thomas William Hayes," he began, "recording this message as part of our private estate contract, witnessed and notarized on August 15th, 2009. This message is intended for my wife, Margaret, and the legal parties assigned under Clause 12D. My heart pounded. I held the lamp close, not daring to breathe. My assets, intellectual property, and residence are protected under trust. However, an additional clause has been included, one that may not be shared unless triggered by circumstances of direct disrespect or displacement of my wife from her rightful home. A pause. Then, the moment she is made unwelcome in her home, verbally, physically, or symbolically, is the moment all secondary beneficiaries forfeit their claim. In that moment, full ownership transfers to her name with legal authority to remove any resident at will. I stared into the dark. He had known. Somehow he had known, and he had left me a weapon not made of steel or wrath, but of something far more terrifying to people like Victoria, truth-bound in law. I repacked the lamp carefully, wrapped it in an old sweater, and placed it in the box marked seasonal decorations. No one would touch it there. Then I waited until Monday morning when Victoria took her manifestation hike and my son left for work and made a call. I didn't call the main family lawyer. I called her, Patricia Stone, my husband's oldest colleague, the woman who once joked, "If the sharks ever come circling Margaret, I'll be the net." Patricia answered on the first ring. "Margaret," she said, voice sharp and warm all at once. "I was wondering when I'd hear from you." "I have something," I said. "Something Thomas left behind. Hidden. You need to hear it for yourself." I sent the lamp the next day, packed in bubble wrap, labeled simply, "To P.S. Play at your desk alone." She called me 2 days later. "I always knew your husband was a fox," she said, "but this is art." "Will it hold up?" I asked. "In court?" "Like granite," she replied. "The only thing left is to trigger the clause officially. Do you have proof of mistreatment?" I thought of the brunch, the comments, the sticky notes, the locked cabinet. "I have more than proof," I said. "I have a child's whisper in a pillowcase scrap. I have a wedding photo in a drawer and a ghost blessing taped to the door, and I have silence. So much silence." Patricia didn't need convincing. She'd seen worse from greedier people. We arranged the rest in code. Package delivery meant court filing. Sunlight refund meant a formal hearing date. Lavender tea meant subpoena. It felt almost fun, like being in one of those detective shows Victoria always rolled her eyes at. But this wasn't a show. This was my life. And I wasn't going to sit on the couch another week while someone else burned Palo Santo in the place I once called sanctuary. I dusted off my good shoes. I ironed my blouse. I looked into the mirror and saw a woman with purpose. My voice wasn't loud, but now it had speakers and they had no idea what was coming. It began decades ago over cheap wine and cheaper office chairs. My husband and I started our first business with a stack of scribbled napkin ideas, a few boxes of secondhand parts, and a stubborn refusal to quit. He handled the patents and the pitching. I handled the people, the contracts, the licensing deals, the long meetings that stretched into dinner. We didn't have titles, but we were equal in every way that mattered. When the business finally took off and then took off again, Thomas said to me over breakfast one day, "We'll put your shares into a trust quietly, just in case." "In case of what?" I had asked. "In case the world ever gets noisy," he replied without looking up from his eggs. At the time, I thought it was a romantic gesture. Turns out it was a weapon he'd forged long before the war began. The trust had sat undisturbed for nearly 20 years. We never touched it, never bragged about it. Even when Forbes put his face in the corner of a page, or when we got calls from people wanting to leverage opportunity, we smiled politely and said, "No, thank you." We kept our lives small. What Victoria never understood was that quiet wealth doesn't look like yachts or handbags. It looks like a woman baking muffins in an old house with $28 million parked neatly in a trust deed no one's bothered to look at in decades. Until now. Patricia and I sat in the conference room side by side. Across from us were Victoria and my son Daniel, both acting as though this was just some petty dispute over square footage. They didn't know what was coming, not yet. "Let's begin," Patricia said, sliding a leather-bound folder across the table. This is the formal reading of the Hayes Domestic Living Trust, last revised in 2012. Victoria rolled her eyes. Patricia continued, calm and steady. Clause 17B, also known as the Conduct Clause, states the following: any individual, whether familial or legal heir, who knowingly subjects Margaret Hayes to verbal disparagement, emotional displacement, or involuntary eviction from the shared household shall immediately and irrevocably forfeit all rights to inheritance and occupancy. I glanced at Daniel. He was pale. Victoria scoffed. That's ridiculous. You can't enforce a mood. We're not enforcing a mood, Patricia said coolly. We're enforcing documented violations. She reached into her briefcase and produced a flash drive, a stack of printed stills, and a lamp. Yes, the same lamp that had lived on my bedside table for years. Now it sat at the center of the table like a witness called to testify. Patricia plugged the flash drive into the monitor. First, a video clip. Victoria at her brunch, champagne in hand, sitting cross-legged on my bed. This sanctuary belongs to me now. The ancient woman exists only in my husband's memory, and even that's fading. Laughter erupted in the background. Another voice. Perhaps she left something in the will, like her dentures. And then Victoria again. I visualized her disappearing. The room went silent. My heart didn't race. It slowed, steady as granite. I'd heard it live, but hearing it now with the weight of law behind it gave it power. Next came the photos. One showed the bedroom door with the new sign, his and hers meditation sanctuary. Another showed the brunch guests lounging on my old quilt. Another showed me curled on the living room sofa under a throw blanket next to a note that read, "For circulation." Finally, Patricia picked up the lamp. This lamp contains a digital audio recording made by Thomas Hayes, dated and time-stamped August 15th, 2009, in the presence of notary Helen R. Klein. It was sealed and stored in a secure compartment inside the base. The audio has been authenticated by forensic analysts and notarized as legal testament under Colorado statute. She pressed play. Thomas's voice filled the room. The moment she is made unwelcome in her home, verbally, physically, or symbolically, is the moment all secondary beneficiaries forfeit their claim. In that moment, full ownership transfers to her name with legal authority to remove any resident at will. Daniel shifted in his seat. Victoria narrowed her eyes. You can't be serious. This is insane. Patricia smiled, the kind of smile lawyers save for checkmate. It's not insane, it's legal. The trust is valid, the clause is active, the evidence is overwhelming. She turned to me. Margaret, per clause 17B, would you like to invoke your rights under the trust? I looked at Victoria, not with anger, but with something deeper. Pity, maybe, or perhaps quiet satisfaction. Yes, I said, effective immediately. Patricia handed me a pen. With one signature, it was done. Victoria was cut off from the trust entirely. No financial support, no claim to the house, no more lavender brunches on my linens. Daniel would retain a conditional share, but only if he vacated the home within 3 days and issued a written apology for his complicity. They both stormed out, red-faced and sputtering. Victoria tried to slam the door on the way out. It bounced back softly. I'd already replaced the hinges. Patricia turned to me as I gathered my things. What will you do with the house? She asked. I smiled. I'll sell it, even after all this, especially after all this, because the truth was, this house had stopped feeling like home the moment I was forced to whisper in hallways. A home isn't walls and photos. It's safety. It's softness. It's being allowed to take up space. Now that I had it back, I no longer needed it, but the freedom that I'd keep. They made me sit on the far end of the table near the water cooler, away from the windows, as if I might catch a chill from the truth. Victoria walked in first, wearing sunglasses indoors and carrying a designer bag I suspected she didn't buy with her own money. My son followed late as always, his phone in one hand, chewing gum like he had better things to do than attend his own father's will reading. Let's get this over with, he muttered, slumping into the chair across from me. She probably left you some old tea sets and that damn lamp. Victoria snorted. Don't expect a dime from her. She'll be dead by Christmas anyway. I folded my hands in my lap, not trembling, not reacting, just waiting. Patricia, my lawyer, gave me a slight nod. She opened a thin leather folder and adjusted the volume on the small speaker device in front of her. No printed copies today, she said. Per Mr. Hayes's final instruction, the primary clauses of the will are to be delivered in his voice only. Daniel raised an eyebrow. What the hell does that mean? Patricia pressed the button and Thomas spoke. Not the frail version of him near the end, but the Thomas I remembered, clear, commanding, decisive. If my son or his wife ever disrespect the woman who built this house, if they ever reduce her to anything less than she is, deduct everything. I built my name, my company, and my fortune with Margaret. And if you've forgotten it, then you've forgotten who raised you. Daniel leaned forward, stunned. Thomas's voice continued even calmer now. To Victoria, your brunches may be cute, but cruelty is not. This house was not built by mood boards and Palo Santo sticks. It was built by my wife, who scrubbed parts by hand while raising a son I now struggle to recognize. Victoria opened her mouth, then shut it for once. To Margaret, I name you sole executive and sole beneficiary. This trust, assets, property, and shares revert entirely to your name the moment my voice ends. Let them call that manifestation. And then silence, not just in the room, inside them. Daniel sat frozen. Victoria's face twisted, searching for a loophole, an angle, some language she could weaponize. But there wasn't one because Thomas had planned it better than they ever could. Patricia slid over the new deed paperwork, already notarized. Effective immediately, Mrs. Margaret Hayes is the sole owner of the following assets. The primary residence located at 912 Maple Street, full rights to the Hayes Trust totaling $32 million, majority shareholder status in Hayes Solutions, in care and exclusive ownership of the intellectual property portfolio. Victoria stood up so quickly, her chair tipped backward. This is illegal, she snapped. You can't just cut family out like that. Patricia didn't flinch. Yes, we can. And he did. Every document was filed, time-stamped, witnessed, and backed by voice authentication. This is airtight. Victoria turned to Daniel, eyes wild. Do something. He looked at me instead, for the first time in years. You knew about this? He said, voice low. I knew about the lamp, I said softly. But the rest? No, I didn't ask for it. He just remembered. Victoria grabbed her purse and stormed out. Daniel stayed seated, eyes hollow. You could have told me. I could have, I agreed. But would it have changed how you treated me? He didn't answer. Instead, he stood up slowly. Do you want me out by tomorrow? You have 3 days, I said. That's more than you gave me. He nodded. No fight left in him. When he left the room, the air shifted. Patricia leaned back and exhaled. That's the first time I've seen a clause like that executed so cleanly. I smiled faintly. It wasn't written out of anger. No, she agreed. It was written out of memory. Thomas remembered who you were before they tried to erase you. She began organizing the papers. What will you do next? I'm going to pack my lamp and my little chair, and then, I said, standing, I think I'll go home and start looking for a buyer. Patricia paused. You're selling the house? You just got it back. Exactly, I said. And that's all I needed, to know it was mine before I chose to leave it. At the door, I paused and looked back once more at the conference table, at the empty chairs, at the silence they left behind. They thought they could manifest my absence, but all they summoned was my return, and now I was the one holding the pen. The court order was clear. No debate, no appeals. You have 72 hours to vacate the premises. I didn't need to read it again. I watched Daniel's face as the bailiff handed him the document. He didn't blink, just stared at the official seal like it might melt if he looked long enough. Victoria, on the other hand, exploded. "This is abuse," she screamed. "She's abusing the system." "She's abusing it?" I stood silently, my coat buttoned, my hands folded, the same way I had stood quietly in the hallway 4 weeks ago while she sipped wine on my bed and called it the rebirth suite. Now the bed was mine again, and the rebirth, mine too. Daniel stepped forward, slower this time, his voice softer than I had heard in years. "Please, Mom, it was just a joke. All of it. We didn't mean it. You know, Victoria, she talks big, but..." I turned my gaze to him. I let the silence sting for just a moment longer. "You joked," I said, each word precise. "The will listened." He dropped his head. The sound of paper fluttering to the ground filled the room. Victoria was next, her mascara already smeared, her hands flailing like a drowning woman clinging to furniture. "You're heartless," she sobbed. "We welcomed you back. We let you stay." "You let me sleep on a sofa in the house I built," I said. "You covered my space in Palo Santo and called it a blessing. I gave you a home. You gave me hell." She gasped, but no more words came out, only a shrill sound that even the chandelier winced at. I turned and walked down the hallway of my own house. The walls were still painted beige, her favorite shade of bland, but the light felt different now, warmer, clearer. Room by room, I reclaimed what had been taken. In the dining room, I reached for the sideboard drawer. Inside were my embroidered napkins hidden beneath Victoria's gold-trimmed ones, as if my stitches weren't good enough for wine glasses. In the study, I opened a drawer labeled with a sticker that read, "Manifestation Books Only." I smiled, peeled the sticker off, and placed it in my pocket. And then I entered the master bedroom, my bedroom, the rebirth suite, as she'd called it. I stared at the vision board she'd hung above the headboard, filled with magazine cutouts and phrases like, "This year is mine," and "Claim it, girl." I ripped it down in one motion. As I folded the torn poster board, something caught my eye. Dozens of Post-it notes still stuck to furniture, vases, drawers, each scrawled with thick marker. "This one's mine. This one too. Mine, manifested by C." I went room by room, pulling off every last one. In the kitchen, "This Dutch oven is mine." In the hallway, "She's lamp, don't touch," on the mirror. Her reflections fading, mine just beginning. I didn't cry, not once. I placed them all in a brown envelope, sealed it shut, and set it on the couch. Yes, the one I used to sleep on. I labeled it with a single word: returned. Later that evening, Daniel knocked gently on my door. He didn't come in until I told him to. He stood there wringing his hands like a schoolboy caught lying. "We'll go," he said. "I just wanted you to know it didn't start this way. We didn't plan to be cruel." I nodded, but it ended that way. He looked down. "I miss Dad." "I do too," I whispered, "but missing someone doesn't give you permission to become someone they'd hate." He nodded again, slower. "Do you need help packing?" I asked. "No, we'll be out by Friday." He left quietly. Victoria didn't say goodbye, and I didn't expect her to. That night, I made tea with my favorite porcelain cup, the one I found stuffed in the back of the pantry with a note on it that said, "Too old lady-ish." I sat by the window. The lights from the garden flickered softly, just as Thomas had designed them decades ago. Motion-activated, solar-powered, efficient. "Always leave something behind that works without you," he used to say. I think he did. And now, so will I. I sold the house the next morning. No second thoughts, no tours, no waiting. I signed the papers with a calm hand while Victoria was still shrieking into her phone on the front lawn, and Daniel stood beside her, empty-eyed, watching everything slip through his fingers. I didn't look back. Within 2 weeks, I was living in a quiet little apartment near Riverside Park in Chicago. 1 bedroom, a small kitchen, a balcony with just enough room for a rocking chair and a potted plant. It wasn't grand, but it was mine. Mine. Not borrowed, not tolerated, not walked around like I was invisible. Every morning, I took walks through the park. I watched dogs chase squirrels. I listened to the sounds of saxophones from buskers beneath the trees. I started reading again. Real books, the kind with folded corners and no deadlines. No one interrupted. No one told me what I couldn't eat or where I could sit. It was the kind of silence that heals, not the kind they gave me before. I thought about how easily they had tried to erase me, not with cruelty alone, but with performance, with brunches and hashtags and phrases like good for circulation at her age. It wasn't just Victoria. It was the world she represented, one that smiles while it quietly rewrites you out. So I did something with the silence. I used it to start something new. I took $3 million from the inheritance and set up a fund called Women Who Were Erased. It's small for now, but it's real. The fund offers legal counsel, emergency housing, and emotional support for elderly women discarded by their families, women who are told they're too much or in the way, women who are mocked behind their backs while standing right there. Women like me, but not anymore. My name isn't on the foundation plaque. I don't want it to be. Let the world think it came from nowhere, just like they once thought I did. But there's one thing I kept. Taped to my fridge door above the grocery list is a note from my youngest grandchild, written in crooked block letters with a purple glitter pen. Grandma 1, mean lady 0. I see it every morning when I open the fridge. And every morning it reminds me that some victories are quiet, but they echo forever. There's a wooden plaque on the door of my new apartment now. I carved it myself with an old penknife my husband gave me one Christmas when money was tight and love was all we had. The words on it are simple, etched deep. This house was once imagined out of existence. Now it thinks for itself. It's not just a door, it's a beginning. Inside, everything is small but meaningful. A chair that fits me just right. A soft rug beneath my bare feet. The humming sound of the city outside, filtered through warm, clean windows. And the fridge. Right there on the fridge is the note from my granddaughter, written on purple paper, her letters uneven, glitter smudged in the corner. Grandma 1, mean lady 0. I didn't tape it there. She did quietly when her mother wasn't looking during one of her last supervised visits. She hugged me tight that day, whispered, "I'm proud of you," and tucked a tiny origami heart into my coat pocket. That night, I sat in my armchair with the city lights flickering outside like stars I could almost touch, and I let myself cry, not from pain, but from release. For all the times I had swallowed words, turned the other cheek, made myself smaller so others could feel big. Not anymore. I drink coffee in silence now. Not silence out of exile, but silence I choose. I stretch when I wake up. I light candles when it rains. I think out loud. I think about the versions of me they invented. Ghost, burden, fading memory. And then I remember none of those were ever mine. I was never fading. I was watching. I was waiting for the right moment. And when it came, I didn't raise my voice. I raised the will. I raised the truth. I raised myself. Now when the wind rattles the windows and the world outside forgets to be kind, I stand in my doorway, run my fingers across the carved wood, and say to no one and everyone, they thought I was fading. But I was just waiting for the right moment to think out loud. The morning after I settled into my new apartment, something unexpected happened. A knock at my door, gentle, hesitant. I opened it to find Sophie, my granddaughter, standing there with her mother, Daniel's ex-wife, Rebecca. I hadn't seen Rebecca in months, not since the divorce proceedings began. "Margaret," Rebecca said, her voice soft but determined. "I heard what happened. I wanted to apologize for not speaking up, for not protecting you when I should have." She paused, glancing down at Sophie, who was clutching a small wrapped package. "Sophie insisted we come." Sophie stepped forward, her eyes bright with the kind of courage only children possess. "I made you something," she whispered, handing me the package. Inside was a small photo album, handmade with construction paper and ribbon. The cover read, Grandma's Real Stories in her careful block letters. I flipped through the pages, photos of us baking cookies, reading together, working in the garden, moments Victoria had tried to erase, but Sophie had preserved. On the last page, she'd written, You taught me that being quiet doesn't mean being weak. It means you're listening for the right moment to be loud. Rebecca wiped her eyes. She's been asking about you every day. I should have brought her sooner, but I was afraid. You're here now, I said, pulling them both inside. That's what matters. As we sat together drinking hot chocolate, Sophie curled up beside me just like before. Grandma, she said quietly, are you happy now? I looked around my small apartment, at the lamp humming softly on my nightstand, at the carved plaque by my door, at the note on my refrigerator that reminded me daily of my worth. Yes, sweetheart, I said, smoothing her hair. I'm exactly where I belong. 3 months later, I received a letter. The return address made my heart skip. It was from Daniel. Inside, his handwriting was shaky, uncertain. Mom, I've been in therapy, learning about emotional abuse, about enabling, about how I failed you. Victoria and I are divorced. I know I can't undo what happened, but I want you to know. I remember who you are. I remember the mother who stayed up all night when I had pneumonia. I remember the woman who taught me to tie my shoes and drive a car and be kind to people who couldn't help me. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I see you now, really see you. And I'm sorry it took losing everything to remember what mattered most. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my desk drawer. Forgiveness, I'd learned, wasn't something you gave all at once. It was something you chose, day by day, moment by moment. And some days, I chose it. Other days, I chose peace instead. The foundation grew. Women who were erased helped dozens of women reclaim their stories, their homes, their voices. We didn't make headlines or win awards. We just existed, quietly powerful, like the lamp that had saved my life, humble on the outside, revolutionary within dear. One evening, as I was reviewing applications for emergency housing assistance, my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but the voice was familiar. Mrs. Hayes, this is Patricia Stone. I have some interesting news. She paused, and I could hear papers rustling. Remember that intellectual property portfolio from your husband's trust? Well, one of his old patents just became very valuable. A tech company wants to license it for their new sustainable energy project. How valuable? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer would change things. $47 million, Margaret, and that's just the initial licensing fee. I sat in silence for a moment, watching the city lights twinkle beyond my window. Thomas had left me more than a weapon against cruelty. He'd left me the means to fight it on a scale I'd never imagined. Patricia, I said finally, I think it's time to expand the foundation. Within a year, women who were erased had grown from a small local fund to a national organization. We opened safe houses in 12 cities. We provided legal representation for elderly women facing financial abuse. We created support groups for those who'd been made to feel invisible in their own homes. But the part I was proudest of was the smallest, a program called the Lamp Project. We gave every woman who came to us a small lamp, nothing fancy, just a simple bedside light with a hidden compartment in the base. Inside each compartment was a note that read, You are not invisible, you are not forgotten. You are exactly where you need to be to begin again. Some nights I'd sit in my apartment and imagine all those lamps glowing in bedrooms across the country. Quiet beacons of hope for women who'd been told they were too much, too old, too in the way. Each one a reminder that sometimes the most powerful revolutions happen in whispers. The last time I saw Victoria was at a coffee shop downtown. She was sitting alone, scrolling through her phone, her designer bag looking worn at the edges. She looked up as I passed, and for a moment our eyes met. I saw something there I hadn't expected, not anger or resentment, but something that looked almost like recognition. I could have walked past, could have pretended not to see her. Instead, I stopped. Victoria, I said quietly. She looked up, startled. Margaret, She fumbled for words, something I'd never seen her do before. I heard about your foundation, she said finally. The one for women like... She couldn't finish the sentence, but understood. Yes, I said simply. For women like me. We stood there for a moment in uncomfortable silence. Then she said so quietly I almost missed it. I'm sorry. For what I did. For who I became. I nodded. I know. And I did know. I could see it in the way she held herself, the way the fight had gone out of her. She'd lost more than money in our battle. She'd lost the story she'd been telling herself about who she was. Take care of yourself, Victoria, I said. And I meant it, not because I'd forgiven her completely, but because holding on to anger was a luxury I could no longer afford. I had too much light to spread. As I walked away, I felt the weight of the small lamp in my purse, not the original one, but a new one I carried everywhere now, a reminder that some things shine brighter when the world gets dark, and the world, I'd learned, was always getting dark somewhere, but that was okay, because now I knew something I hadn't known before. Darkness wasn't the enemy. Silence wasn't the enemy. The enemy was the lie that we have to disappear to make room for others' light. Thought about Thomas, about the lamp he'd left me, about the love that had outlasted his voice. I thought about Sophie and her fierce loyalty, about Rebecca's courage in bringing her daughter back to me, about Daniel's slow journey toward understanding. I thought about all the women whose lamps were glowing tonight in apartments and shelters and new homes across the country. Women who'd been told they were ghosts, but who'd learned they were actually light itself, quiet, persistent, impossible to extinguish, and I smiled because I knew something Victoria never would. The best revenge isn't noise or drama or public vindication. The best revenge is becoming so full of yourself that the people who tried to erase you can't help but see their own reflection in your light and realize how small they'd made themselves in the process. I was 73 years old, living in a one-bedroom apartment with a carved wooden sign on my door and a foundation that bore my husband's memory forward into the world. I was exactly where I needed to be, exactly who I'd always been underneath all their attempts to minimize me. I was Margaret Hayes. I was not invisible. I was not forgotten, and I was just getting started. The lamp on my nightstand hummed softly as I prepared for bed, its gentle light casting warm shadows on the walls of my sanctuary. Tomorrow would bring new applications to review, new women to help, new lights to kindle in the darkness. But tonight I was simply grateful for the silence that had taught me to listen, grateful for the darkness that had shown me how to shine, grateful for the cruelty that had revealed my own capacity for grace. I turned off the lamp and settled into bed, surrounded by the soft sounds of a city that never sleeps. And as I drifted off, I could swear I heard Thomas's voice one last time, not from a hidden recording, but from the place where love lives on after the body's gone. Some things shine brighter when the world gets dark, Margaret. And you, my dear, have always been the brightest light of all. In the morning, there would be work to do. But tonight, there was peace. And that I'd learned was more than enough. Years passed like pages turning in Sophie's handmade photo album. The foundation flourished, but more importantly, so did I. On my 77th birthday, I received an unexpected visitor. The knock came just as I was finishing my morning coffee. When I opened the door, I found a woman about my age, silver-haired and elegant, holding a small brass lamp. "Mrs. Hayes," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "My name is Eleanor Whitman. I received one of your lamps 3 years ago." I invited her in, recognizing the look in her eyes, the same mixture of fear and determination I'd once seen in my own mirror. She sat carefully on my sofa, cradling the lamp like a precious child. "I was living with my daughter and her husband in Portland," she began. "They'd convinced me to sell my house after my husband died, said it was too much for me to handle alone. But once I moved in, She paused, gathering strength. They treated me like a burden, made me eat different food, told their friends I was losing it when I was sharper than both of them combined. I poured her tea and waited. I'd learned that these stories needed time to unfold, like flowers open into sunlight. One day I found your foundation online. I was so desperate I applied for help, even though I was embarrassed. When your lamp arrived with that note, she touched the base gently. It reminded me that I still mattered, that I deserved better. What did you do? I asked, though I suspected I knew. Eleanor smiled, the first real smile I'd seen from her. I pressed the button, not because there was a recording inside, but because it reminded me I had choices. I used the legal aid your foundation provided, got my own apartment, and started volunteering at the local senior center. She leaned forward. Mrs. Hayes, I wanted to thank you, but more than that, I wanted to tell you something. She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded newspaper clipping. This appeared in the Portland Tribune last week. I unfolded the paper and read the headline, Local Woman Establishes Second Chances Program for Displaced Seniors. Below was a photo of Eleanor standing in front of a small building, surrounded by smiling elderly faces. You inspired me to start my own program, she said. Nothing as big as yours, but we've helped 43 women find new homes and rediscover their voices. Each one gets a lamp, just like mine. I felt tears prick my eyes. This was how change really happened, not through grand gestures or headlines, but through one person inspiring another who inspired another, creating ripples that spread far beyond what any single lamp could illuminate. Eleanor, I said softly, you've just shown me the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. She stayed for lunch, and we talked about everything. Our husbands, our children, our dreams deferred, and finally reclaimed. When she left, she hugged me tightly and whispered, "Thank you for teaching me that it's never too late to shine." That evening, I called Patricia. "I want to do something," I told her. "Something bigger." "What did you have in mind?" I looked at the lamp on my nightstand, thinking about Eleanor, about all the women we'd helped, about all the ones we hadn't reached yet. "I want to establish a scholarship program for women over 60 who want to go back to school, start businesses, pursue dreams they put aside. I want to call it the Thomas Hayes Memorial Fund for Late Bloomers." Patricia was quiet for a moment. "How much are you thinking?" "All of it," I said. "Every penny from the patent licensing, the house sale, everything except what I need to live simply. I want to create something that outlasts me." "Margaret," she said carefully, "that's nearly $60 million. "I know." I smiled, thinking of Thomas, of his quiet wisdom, of the way he'd planned for a future he wouldn't see. He always said the best investments are the ones that pay dividends long after you're gone. The scholarship program launched 6 months later. The first recipient was a 72-year-old woman named Rose, who'd always wanted to be a teacher but had spent 50 years raising children and caring for an invalid husband. At 72, she enrolled in education classes, and at 75 became a substitute teacher, beloved by students who called her Grandma Rose. The second was a 68-year-old former nurse who used her scholarship to start a mobile health clinic for rural elderly. The third opened a bakery that employed other older women who'd been told they were too old to work. Each scholarship recipient received the same thing Eleanor had given me, proof that it's never too late to begin again. On my 80th birthday, Sophie, now a confident teenager, organized a surprise party in my apartment. The guest list was small but meaningful. Rebecca, Daniel, who'd been slowly earning his way back into my life through consistent actions rather than words, Patricia, Eleanor, and a handful of women from the foundation. But the surprise wasn't the party. It was what Sophie had prepared. "Grandma," she said, standing in the center of my living room, "I've been working on something for months. She pulled out a thick, professionally bound book. It's your story, all of it. I interviewed everyone, Mom, Dad, Eleanor, even some of the women from your foundation who were willing to talk. I opened the book with trembling hands. The title page read, The Lamp Keeper, How One Woman's Light Ignited a Revolution of Grace. Below it was a photo I'd never seen, Thomas and me on our wedding day, young and radiant, his arm around my shoulders, both of us looking like we believed in forever. Sophie, I whispered, it's not just your story, Grandma. It's proof. Proof that quiet people can change the world. Proof that it's never too late to fight back. Proof that love really does outlast everything else. I flipped through pages filled with photos, interviews, and stories I'd almost forgotten. There was a chapter about the foundation's impact with statistics that took my breath away. Over 3,000 women helped, 47 satellite programs started by recipients, countless families reunited or peacefully separated, but the chapter that made me cry was titled The Ripple Effect. It documented women like Eleanor who'd started their own programs, creating an ever-widening circle of support and empowerment. The book estimated that our original lamp had indirectly helped over 10,000 women find their voices. How did you? I began. I had help, Sophie said, grinning. She gestured toward the kitchen where Daniel emerged carrying a cake. For the first time in years, he looked genuinely happy. Mom, he said, setting the cake down carefully, I know I can't undo the past, but I wanted to be part of your future if you'll let me. He paused, his voice thick with emotion. I'm proud of you. I'm proud to be your son, and I'm sorry it took me so long to say that. I looked around the room at these people who'd become my chosen family, some by blood, some by choice, all by love. The lamp on my nightstand cast its gentle glow over faces that reflected back not pity or tolerance, but genuine affection and respect. You know, I said, cutting into the cake Sophie had decorated with tiny edible lamps. Thomas always said the best gifts are the ones that keep giving long after the wrapping paper is thrown away. Eleanor raised her teacup. To Margaret Hayes, she said, who taught us that being underestimated is just another word for having the element of surprise. Everyone laughed and raised their cups, but as we toasted, I felt Thomas's presence so strongly, it was almost like he was sitting beside me. I could almost hear his voice. Some things shine brighter when the world gets dark, Margaret, and look how bright you've made it. Later that night, after everyone had gone home and the dishes were washed, I sat in my chair by the window. The city sparkled below, full of lights and lives and stories yet to be told. I thought about the woman I'd been 4 years ago, sleeping on a couch, invisible in her own home, convinced her story was over. I thought about Victoria, whom I'd heard was working as a yoga instructor now, teaching classes for seniors. I hoped she'd found peace. I thought about all the women whose lamps were glowing tonight in bedrooms and apartments and shelters across the country. I thought about the ripples still spreading, the light still being kindled, the quiet revolution still beginning. And I realized something that filled me with a joy so profound it felt like prayer. I hadn't just survived my erasure. I'd transformed it into illumination for others. The lamp on my nightstand hummed its familiar tune as I prepared for bed. Tomorrow would bring new applications, new stories, new opportunities to help someone remember their own worth. But tonight, I was simply grateful to be exactly who I'd always been underneath all their attempts to diminish me. I was Margaret Hayes. I was 80 years old. I was not invisible, not forgotten, not fading. I was a keeper of lamps, a tender of lights, a woman who'd learned that the most powerful weapon against cruelty isn't revenge. It's becoming so fully yourself that your very existence becomes an act of revolution. And as I drifted off to sleep, surrounded by the gentle glow of my lamp and the infinite possibilities of tomorrow, I smiled. Because I knew that somewhere out there, another woman was pressing a button on her own lamp, taking her first step toward reclaiming her light. The revolution continued one lamp at a time, one woman at a time, one quiet act of courage at a time, and it was beautiful.